Project Planning and Control, PP&C. Risk, Execution, and Communication. Course 4, Module 3. Budget execution is the E in PPB, the phase in which appropriated funds are committed, obligated, costed, and disbursed through a system of controls, legal requirements, and monthly plans. The distinction between receiving an appropriation and being able to spend it is not administrative. It is structural. Understanding the four-step cycle is the difference between managing money and just tracking it. After this module, the commitment to disbursement cycle should be something a student can explain in plain language to a program manager who has never heard the terminology. Budget execution is where financial management credibility is built or lost. Get the phasing plan right, stay ahead of obligations, and protect forward funding. Everything else flows from those three disciplines. In this module, we'll examine what happens after funding has been appropriated and how government programs execute those funds throughout the fiscal year. We'll follow the complete budget execution process, from commitment and obligation through cost and disbursement, while exploring cost planning, forward funding, funds control, and monthly phasing plans. We'll also discuss the Anti-Deficiency Act and the responsibilities that come with managing public funds. By the end of the module, you'll understand how to evaluate budget execution, recognize planning patterns that may indicate potential issues, and determine whether a program spending plan is realistic, executable, and aligned with its objectives. By the end of this module, you'll understand how government funds move through the budget execution process and how those resources are managed throughout a program's life cycle. You'll learn how to evaluate cost and obligation plans, assess forward funding and cost carryover, recognize planning patterns that may signal potential issues, and understand the role of the work breakdown structure and the Anti-Deficiency Act in budget management. Most importantly, you'll develop the analytical mindset needed to assess budget execution and provide informed recommendations that support effective program decision-making. Budget execution encompasses far more than spending. It includes receiving, controlling, distributing, analyzing, replanning, and reporting funds against a structured monthly plan. Every person who touches government money, from the analyst who initiates a purchase request to the program manager who approves a contract modification, is performing budget execution and is subject to the legal requirements that govern it. The comprehensiveness of the budget execution definition is important because it means that compliance is not just a finance office responsibility. It belongs to every member of the project business team. Know which of the 7 budget execution functions you personally perform on your program. Gaps in understanding any of them are gaps in your ability to keep the program financially compliant. The PPB framework, planning, programming, budgeting, execution, positions execution as the final phase where all the planning and formulation work gets translated into actual spending. The passback step in February/March is where OMB responds to agency budget submissions with adjustments. By the time execution begins in October, the numbers have been through the full political and administrative gauntlet. The 2-year lag between when a budget is formulated and when it is actually spent means execution is always managing funds that were planned against assumptions that may no longer match current reality. When you are in execution and the numbers do not match your plan, remember that your plan was built 18 to 24 months ago. Realism about that lag is essential for effective replanning. The 7 roles of budget execution: receiving, controlling, distributing, spending, analyzing, replanning, and reporting apply to any government official who has responsibility for any agency funds, not just financial specialists. The scope of who performs budget execution in practice is broader than most people realize. Anyone who initiates a purchase request, approves a training expense, or draws a civil servant salary is participating in budget execution. The analytical and replanning functions are where PP&C adds the most unique value. Receiving, controlling, distributing, and spending are largely administrative, while analysis and replanning require judgment and context. If your role involves any of these 7 functions, you need to understand the legal and procedural requirements that govern them. Ignorance of the Anti-Deficiency Act does not protect against its penalties. The 4-step execution cycle, program authority, purchase request/commitment, obligation, cost, and disbursement, represents the sequential path every dollar travels from legislative appropriation to completed work. Each step has different legal and timing implications. Commitment reserves funds, but creates no legal liability. Obligation creates legal liability. Cost confirms work was performed. Disbursement confirms payment. The most important relationship in this sequence for the analyst is that cost cannot occur without prior obligation. A contractor working without obligation coverage is creating a potential Anti-Deficiency Act violation. Keep the obligation status up to date and compare it to actual costs monthly. The gap between obligations and costs is your forward funding cushion. When that cushion disappears, the program has a compliance risk. Budget execution requires a monthly phased spending plan for both obligations and costs. Importantly, R&D appropriations are available for obligation for 2 years, which provides planning flexibility but not an invitation to delay. The 2-year obligation availability for R&D funds is often misunderstood as a 2-year spending window. It is not. It is a safety net for situations where procurement timelines extend beyond a single fiscal year. The existence of a 2-year availability window does not alter the expectation that funds be obligated in a timely manner, consistent with the work plan. Excess carryover is still a management concern. Plan your obligations to match your work schedule, not to maximize the use of the 2-year window. Using the window as a planning crutch creates the unobligated balance problems described in the next few slides. The monthly plan chart sets the visual template for budget execution tracking, a plan line and an actual line for both obligations and costs, reviewed every month for 12 consecutive months. The obligation plan will naturally be stair-stepped because you place contracts in chunks, and the cost plan should be smoother because work happens continuously once it is underway. The relationship between the obligation and cost lines is as important as either line individually. If costs are running ahead of obligations, there is a compliance problem. If obligations are running far ahead of costs, there may be excess carryover building. Review both the obligation line and the cost line every month and understand the spread between them. That spread is your forward funding cushion. Its size matters. Obligations legally commit the government to pay and must precede costs. Cost requirements should drive the obligation plan, not the reverse, and cost planning should be developed first against the work schedule. The instruction to develop the cost plan first before deriving the obligation plan is the sequence most analysts invert. They plan obligations because they are more visible in the financial system and then infer costs from them. Obligation planning that is not grounded in a cost plan first will produce a forward funding structure that may look adequate on paper, but does not reflect when the work actually needs to be done. Discipline yourself to build cost plans from work schedules and cost requirements, then derive obligations from those cost plans. The obligation plan is a downstream product, not the starting point. Cost carryover. The difference between total obligations and total costs at fiscal year end is the forward funding that sustains continuity of work between the end of one fiscal year and the receipt of new funding at the start of the next. 1 to 3 months of available cost carryover is the acceptable range. Above that range signals either excess budget or insufficient progress, both of which will attract oversight attention. Carryover must be sized after cost requirements are established for planned work, rather than being set arbitrarily or driven by a desire to avoid giving money back. Calculate your expected end-of-year carryover during the budget formulation cycle, not in September. If it is trending above 3 months, start identifying the underlying cause early so you can address it. Funds control uses the WBS structure to distribute budget across specific project elements, ensuring that each funding pocket is traceable to a specific deliverable and that individuals cannot spend from each other's accounts. The analogy of breaking a dollar into quarters, dimes, and pennies captures the principle precisely. The control structure becomes progressively more granular, but when you add everything back up, it must equal the original total. A WBS that is too high level for funds control creates situations where multiple activities compete for the same account, which makes variance analysis impossible and creates compliance risk. Ensure your project's WBS is sufficiently detailed to enable meaningful control of funds at the control account level. If two unrelated activities share a funding code, you have a funds control problem waiting to happen. 2-year obligation availability does not mean 2 years to obligate. Unobligated balances rolling through fiscal years have been a persistent oversight concern, and funds not obligated in a timely manner can be withdrawn. The instruction to utilize unobligated balances first when formulating annual budget needs is critically important and widely ignored. Analysts who build new budget requests without accounting for prior year carry create inflated requests and unnecessary oversight attention. All funds must be spent in accordance with appropriated law, which leads directly to the Anti-Deficiency Act as the primary legal constraint on budget execution. Before submitting any new budget request, reconcile your unobligated and uncosted balances from prior years. They count against your new requirement, and ignoring them is both inaccurate and subject to oversight. The Anti-Deficiency Act prohibits 3 specific violations: obligating funds in excess of available appropriations, obligating funds in excess of apportionments, and obligating funds for purposes outside their intended use. NASA has violated this act in the recent past, not through intentional fraud, but through lapses in control that resulted in obligations exceeding available authority. The reporting requirements to the President, Congress, and the Comptroller General are public and embarrassing. The penalties include removal from office, like a $5,000 fine, and imprisonment for 2 years for knowing and willful violations. But even accidental violations require formal reporting and corrective action that reflects poorly on program leadership. Know your obligation ceilings and track against them monthly. The cost of a compliance failure vastly exceeds the administrative burden of maintaining proper controls. Cost planning is both a management tool and a government requirement. Plans must be developed prior to or concurrent with execution and must reflect the technical plans and schedule of deliverables for each month. The phrase cost performance versus plan will tell us important information about how the project is performing against its technical plans, is the core rationale for cost phasing. The monthly plan is not just a financial instrument. It is a technical progress indicator. A cost plan that is not grounded in the work schedule will tell you nothing useful when actuals deviate from it, because the plan itself is not an accurate reflection of when work should be occurring. Every time you update a cost plan, validate it against the current schedule. If the schedule has changed and the cost plan has not, the plan is no longer a useful analytical reference. Monthly cost phasing requires understanding the WBS structure that organizes the work and the assumptions, including inflation rates, contractor rates, and workforce projections that convert technical scope into dollar estimates. The assumptions underlying a phasing plan are where the intellectual work is. A phasing plan without documented assumptions cannot be defended under questioning and cannot be updated as conditions change. WBS-based phasing ensures that each cost element is traceable to a specific deliverable, which allows variance analysis to identify not just that a cost is off, but where in the program the deviation is concentrated. Document your phasing assumptions in a companion note to the cost plan. When the plan needs to be revised, the assumptions are your starting point for understanding what changed. In addition to WBS and assumptions, good cost phasing requires incorporating technical scope drivers contractor inputs, including EVMS outputs and award fee milestones, the integrated master schedule, and UFE allocation. Contractor EVMS output, specifically the earned value and estimate to complete data, is the most direct input for government cost phasing on a cost-plus contract. If you're not using it, you are planning from less accurate sources. UFE allocation across the fiscal year should reflect when risks are most likely to materialize, rather than being distributed equally or loaded at year-end to avoid scrutiny. Every element on this list should have a traceable source in your phasing documentation. If you cannot identify the source of a number, the number is not defensible. The range of analyses possible from budget execution data is extensive, including plan versus actual variances, EOI projections, rate trends, EVM, cost-benefit analyses, schedule comparisons, audits, and internal controls. Not all of these analyses are relevant to every program or every month. The discipline is knowing which ones are most important, given the current program status, and applying them consistently rather than opportunistically. Plan versus actual and trend analyses are the core monthly disciplines. The others are applied when specific questions arise, such as an audit request, a review board inquiry, or a significant variance that requires deeper investigation. Build a monthly analysis package that covers the core disciplines and identify which additional analyses to run when specific triggers are met. Do not try to do everything every month. Cost plan analysis is a structured activity with specific patterns to look for. The same steep buildups, severe drop-offs, dips, and short peak periods that appeared in contractor workforce analysis apply equally to government cost phasing plans. Most analysts spend time analyzing actuals against plans and very little time questioning whether the plan itself was constructed correctly. A flawed plan is worse than no plan because it generates meaningless variances. The quality of the cost plan determines the quality of the analysis, which is why understanding what to look for in a cost plan is a prerequisite for the subsequent variance analysis. Treat cost plan review as a separate discipline from actuals analysis. Apply the pattern checks before you start comparing actuals to the plan. A good cost plan must pass two primary checks. It must be consistent with the scheduled work, reflecting what is actually planned to happen each month. And it must be supported by available budget. Costs must never exceed available funding. Budget reductions and management challenges, in which leadership imposes a cost target below what the technical plan requires, are among the most common sources of artificially constrained, and therefore analytically useless, cost plans. A cost plan that has been forced to fit within a budget constraint rather than derived from technical requirements will show smooth behavior at the cost of accuracy. The smoothness itself is a warning sign for development programs. When reviewing a cost plan, ask whether it was built top-down based on budget constraints or bottom-up based on work requirements. The direction of construction determines how much analytical value it has. Prior year resources, unobligated and uncosted balances from previous fiscal years, must be included in the available funds calculation before developing new requirements, or the result will be inflated requests and excess carryover. This is the mistake that creates the large, unobligated balance problems described earlier in the module. Analysts who plan each year in isolation, without accounting for carry-forward funds, repeat the error in every cycle. The instruction to include prior year resources in available funds for the year sounds obvious, but is consistently overlooked in practice, particularly on programs with multiple funding lines and complex WBS structures. Before finalizing any new fiscal year cost plan, reconcile all prior year funding lines and subtract available uncosted balances from your new requirement. This step prevents the single most common budget execution error. A front-loaded cost plan shows monthly costs declining from the start of the fiscal year to the end, which can be legitimate if the project is nearing completion or making early deliveries, but is a red flag if it reflects an unrealistic assumption of workforce drop-off. The gamesmanship version of front-loading Deliberately planning high early costs to demonstrate budget need is a real pattern that experienced oversight reviewers have seen many times. Headquarters will recognize it. The legitimacy of a front-loaded plan depends entirely on whether the work schedule supports the cost profile. If there is no technical reason for the front load, the plan is not credible. Always connect a front-loaded cost plan to specific deliverables or milestone events. If you cannot make that connection, the plan needs to be revised before it is submitted. A backloaded plan showing costs increasing significantly at year-end is the mirror image of front-loading, legitimate for a new project or phase startup, but suspicious if it reflects an attempt to fit within a cost target by reducing early spending. The bad reason for backloading is often not gamesmanship, but risk aversion. Analysts who are uncertain about whether resources will be available sometimes push costs to the end of the year as a hedge, which creates a different set of problems. Backloaded plans concentrated in the final months of the fiscal year attract oversight attention because they appear to hide reserves, even when there is a legitimate programmatic explanation. If a backloaded plan is legitimate, document the technical reason explicitly in the phasing notes. An unexplained backload will generate questions that could have been preemptively answered. A straight-line cost plan is appropriate only for true level-of-effort activities, such as steady-state workforce support. Development programs cannot legitimately have straight-line cost profiles because development work is not evenly distributed across months. The observation that not all months are created equal, 4 months each year contain 5 weeks of work, is one of the most practical reminders in budget execution. A straight-line plan that does not account for this is wrong by definition on a weekly reporting contract. Straight-line plans are often the product of laziness rather than analysis. Taking last year's plan and adding inflation is exactly the method Bill describes as the source of large, unobligated balance problems at NASA. If a straight-line plan is submitted for review, ask what work schedule supports it. The answer will immediately reveal whether the plan was derived from technical inputs or simply copied and pasted from a prior period. Steep month-to-month ramp-ups or ramp-downs in cost plans require a specific legitimate justification, fixed-price deliverables, or major milestone workforce events, because instant staffing changes are unrealistic for development programs. The legal reminder here is important and often unknown to analysts. It is illegal to ask a contractor to defer costs already incurred. A cost plan that shows an artificial drop to meet a target implicitly assumes the contractor has deferred work, which is not permissible. The same workforce logic that makes steep buildups suspicious in contractor data applies equally to government cost plans. People do not appear and disappear instantly, and costs that follow that pattern are not reflecting real work schedules. Before accepting any steep ramp in a cost plan, identify the specific event that justifies it. If no such event exists, the plan needs to be corrected. UFE should be allocated using judgment about when risks are most likely to materialize, not spread equally across all months, and not loaded at year-end to avoid scrutiny. The pattern of loading reserves at year-end is so common that experienced oversight reviewers specifically look for it. A UFE allocation concentrated in the last quarter of the fiscal year, with no supporting risk justification, is one of the most transparent gamesmanship patterns in budget execution. Planning peaks in work and scheduling risk events provides the most defensible basis for UFE allocation. If the cost plan shows peak work activity in month 6, that is where UFE should be concentrated, not in month 12. Tie every UFE allocation to a specific risk item or plan peak in the work schedule. An allocation that cannot be connected to a specific programmatic basis is not defensible. The quality of project planning is ultimately determined by 2 factors: the effort directed toward analysis and assessment, and the qualities of the analysts doing it. This is the slide that transitions from process to people. The implication is that the best process in the world does not produce good analysis if the analyst does not bring the right qualities to the task. These 2 factors process effort, and analyst quality are not independent. An analyst with strong personal qualities who applies a weak process will still miss things. A rigorous process applied by a disengaged analyst will also miss things. Both must be present. Take this slide seriously as a self-assessment prompt. Which of the two factors is the limiting constraint in your current role? The four foundational analyst qualities are a why mentality, genuine interest in the program, the ability to work well with others, and a number sense. The first three are arguably more important than technical proficiency. The why mentality is first on the list for a reason. Everyone the analyst works with, contractors, project managers, and engineers, has some incentive to present a positive picture. The analyst's role is to ask why until the picture is accurate. Number sense is described as a feel for numbers, the ability to calculate in your head. It is not the same as being a mathematician. It is the ability to know when a number does not look right before you have done the formal calculation. Of these four qualities, identify the one you are weakest in and focus your development there. A single significant gap in any of them limits the effectiveness of all the others. Reliability, communication, timing, and common sense and good judgment are the second set of analyst qualities that determine whether the technical capability built through the first four qualities actually delivers value to the project team. Tom Newman's saying captures the timing quality perfectly. A half analysis delivered before the meeting beats a complete analysis delivered after. In real programs, decisions do not wait for perfect information. Reliability is the quality that converts individual analysis into institutional trust. An analyst who is consistently accurate, even when the news is bad, becomes the person the project team calls before making major decisions. Write down the name of one senior colleague who exemplifies each of these four qualities. What do they do that you do not do yet? That list is your development roadmap. Knowing the big picture, the strategic plan, the project management handbook, the mission directorate roadmaps, the congressional operating plan controls, and what is happening in the specific project are the intelligence-gathering qualities that separate insight from analysis. The instruction to invite yourself to technical meetings and tour contractor facilities is not optional advice. It is the mechanism by which the analyst builds the contextual knowledge that makes their analysis credible rather than mechanical. The less you understand about the program, the more likely your analysis is flawed. This is not a philosophical statement. It is a practical observation about the origin of context-dependent errors. Schedule a facility visit or a technical tag-up attendance on a program you have been analyzing remotely. What you learn in one afternoon will change how you interpret the next 3 months of data. Knowing how to analyze and where to get data, monthly reports, trends, schedule versus historical precedent, and knowing the players, engineers who are optimists, program analysts who add realism, are the operational competencies that make the analyst effective in the field. The instruction to be tough but polite captures something important about the analyst role. You will frequently be in a position where your analysis contradicts what the project team wants to hear. How you deliver that message determines whether they keep inviting you back. Learning to read people is not a soft skill addendum to the technical content. It is a core analytical competency in an environment where most data sources are motivated by perspective. After every major analytical engagement, ask yourself what you learned about the people, not just the numbers. The people are where the early warning lives. As we conclude this module, we've seen that successful budget execution involves much more than simply spending appropriated funds. It requires understanding how resources flow through the execution process, developing realistic cost and obligation plans, monitoring funding and performance throughout the year, and recognizing the patterns that may indicate emerging issues. Most importantly, effective PP&C professionals combine sound analysis with critical thinking to ask the right questions, identify potential concerns early, and provide leadership with the insight needed to keep programs on track. 3 questions test the core module 2 competencies. Unobligated balance management, CR impact on new procurements, and cost plan quality assessment. Q1 requires the student to identify both the problem and the preventive action, not just what went wrong, but what the right process would have looked like. Q2 requires applying CR knowledge to a specific operational scenario. Q3 requires recognizing two separate flaws in a straight-line development plan. All three questions are application questions, not recall questions. A student who has internalized a module should be able to answer them without referencing the slides. These questions should be difficult. If they are easy, either the student is exceptionally well prepared or the questions have been answered before. Having completed the contract analysis and budget execution modules, the analytical toolkit is in place. What remains is the structured protocol for applying it consistently every month through the checklist framework. The transition from analysis mechanics to a structured checklist represents a maturation in the analyst's engagement with monthly data, from ad hoc investigation to systematic interrogation. The checklist does not replace judgment. It protects against the cognitive bias of focusing only on what is already concerning and missing what is quietly building in the background. The checklist is most valuable precisely in the months when nothing seems wrong. That is when the systematic protocol catches what intuition would miss.